Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Awesome Albums with Awesome Andrew. Now before I begin, I need to travel back to June 1st of this year. I need to because I have a little rhyme. It'll only work if it's June 1st. Okay? It was 50 years ago today, the Beatles decided to play. An album that will make you smile and still great after all the while. So let me introduce to you the album after all these years is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That's right. This album reached 50 years old this year. Let's just take a minute to grasp on how awesome that is. It's so cool. Now, let's put on our John Lennon glasses and dive into this album. First, of course, we have to discuss the personnel that made up the Beatles. You should know them by name, but in case you don't, here we go. John Lennon. The first album to feature him wearing these glasses. He does acoustic and lead guitars, Hammond organ, harmonica, tape loops, sound effects, Coleman tissue paper, hand claps, tambourine, maracas, and the final piano E chord. Paul McCartney on bass and lead guitars, electric and acoustic pianos, Lowry and Hammond organs, hand claps, vocalizations, tape loops, and Coleman tissue paper. George Harrison, lead, rhythm guitars, sitar, tambura, harmonica, and the final piano E chord. And Ringo Starr on drums, congas, tambourine, maracas, hand claps, tubular bells, harmonica, and the final piano E chord. Other notable personnel who helped bring this album to life are Ian Aspinall, who did tambura and harmonica, Jeff Emmerich, our audio engineer but also did tape loops and sound effects, Mal Evans, the Beatles tour manager who did the counting as well as harmonica, alarm clock, and the final piano E chord. And of course, we can't forget about George Martin, legendary producer and mixer, who contributed to tape loops and sound effects, as well as harpsichord, harmonium, Lowry organ, Hammond organ, glockenspiel, and the final harmonium chord. I found so much history on this one album, I made an entire video dedicated to just the history in the album cover itself. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely check it out. But with this video, I'm going to jump straight into the music, starting with our first song, which is also the title track. The title track starts off with about 10 seconds of the band warming up and audience noises waiting for the show to begin, creating the illusion of a live performance. Now remember, the Beatles never did this album live. McCartney's vocals come on, and they almost border hard rock in a way. It's already a different sound than what you would expect on a normal Beatles album. We have 4 French players in this song. They are Neil Sanders, James W. Buck, John Burton, and Tony Randall, and arranged and conducted by McCartney. George Martin recalled, Sgt. Pepper itself didn't appear until halfway through the making of the album. It was Paul's song, just an ordinary rock number. But when we had finished it, Paul said, why don't we make the album as though the Pepper Band really existed, as though Sgt. Pepper was making the record. We'll dub in effects and things. I loved the idea, and from that moment on, it was as though Pepper had a life of its own. End quote. Toward the end of the song, McCartney comes back on, acting as the master of ceremonies, asking us to give it up to Ringo's alter ego, Billy Shears. The crowd cheering was actual cheering that Martin recorded during a concert at the Hollywood Bowl. The title track transitions into Ringo's vocal spot on the album. One of the first times of a song transition in music history, if not the first.
What would you think if I sang out a tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me?
Though written by the Lennon-McCartney duo, Ringo requested a change for this line. The original line was, what would you think if I sang out a tune? Would you throw ripe tomatoes at me? He wanted this changed so that if he were to ever do the song live, that fans would not throw tomatoes at him. In the early days, after George made a passing comment that he liked Jelly Babies, the group got showered with them at all their live performances. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'd rather not have tomatoes thrown at my face. Although, my singing is pretty bad, so I might deserve a tomato or two. The song throughout has Paul and John asking questions for Ringo to answer, all of them about the meaning of friendship and true love. The song ends on a vocal high note that McCartney, Harrison, and Lennon encouraged Starr to achieve despite his lack of confidence as a singer, and I think he did a good job pulling it off. So many people speculate that the song is about drugs. John said he was surprised at the idea that the song had a hidden meaning for LSD. He countered by saying the song wasn't about that at all, and it was purely unconscious that it came out to be LSD. Until someone pointed out, I never thought of it. I mean, who would even bother to look at initials of a title? It's not an acid song. End quote. Paul confirmed Lennon's claim several times. The earliest was in 1968, saying, when you write a song and you mean it one way, and someone comes up and says something about it you didn't think of, you can't deny it. Like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. People came up and said cunningly, right, I get it, LSD, and it was when papers were talking about LSD, but we never thought about it. End quote. Paul said in a BBC interview in 1997, it wasn't about LSD, otherwise it would have been called LITSWD. Because the initials aren't LSD, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is more like that. End quote. So if you were wondering, well, if it's not about drugs, then why is it so trippy, man? The last fact I want to mention for the song is the origin of the title. We've moved past the whole idea that it is a drug song, but the idea of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is a pretty weird and trippy concept. But what if I told you that it wasn't John's idea, or Paul's idea, or any of the other Beatles ideas that came up with the song title? It was John's 3-year-old son, Julian, who showed him a nursery school drawing he called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which he named after his classmate Lucy O'Donnell, later Lucy Vodden. Julian later said, I don't know why I called it that, or why it stood from all my other drawings, but I obviously had an affection for Lucy at that age. I used to show Dad everything I'd built or painted at school, and this one sparked off the idea. End quote. I have so much more to say about the song, and much more information. Definitely check out the Awesome Albums Extras video that will be coming out soon-ish. Getting Better was one of the first Beatles songs I ever heard in a Philips flat-screen TV commercial in 1999. It's such an upbeat song, but if you listen to the lyrics, it's got some pretty depressing ones. Like, listen to this, for example.
It's getting better, a little better, all the time.
I love this contrast between McCartney and Lennon, and it shows the contrasting personas of the two songwriters. McCartney said in December of 1983 that he couldn't have done it himself. Hunter Davies, who wrote the only authorized biography of the Beatles, recalled the origin of the song title. He said, I was just walking around Primrose Hill with Paul and his dog Martha. It was bright and sunny, the first spring-like morning we'd had that year. Thinking about the weather, Paul said, it's getting better, meaning that spring was here. But he started laughing, and when I asked him why, he told me that it reminded him of something. Paul told him a story about Jimmy Nicol, a drummer who played with the band for 10 concert dates on their 1964 tour while Ringo was recovering from tonsillitis and pharyngitis. When asked how he was adapting to the insanity of Beatlemania, he would reply with, it's getting better. The phrase then, of course, became an inside joke with the rest of the band. After that walk, he drove back home and sang the phrase over and over while picking out a tune on guitar. He then worked it out on piano in his music room with a strange tune that almost sounds out of tune. That evening, John came over and Paul suggested to write a song called It's Getting Better. The track begins with a harpsichord played by George Martin. The song deals with McCartney's desire to let his mind wander freely and express his creativity without the burden of self-conscious insecurities. There are always people who think that every song in existence is about drugs, and that fixing a hole is about using or fixing heroin. Though had been discredited as one of many examples of people who are reading too much into those Beatles lyrics. In fact, Paul even responded to those accusations. He said in a 1967 interview, if you're a junkie sitting in a room and fixing a hole, then that's what it will mean to you. But when I wrote it, I meant if there's a crock or the room is uncolorful, then I'll paint it, end quote. Paul said he wrote the song after fixing the roof on a farmhouse he bought in Scotland in 1966. The house was in poor condition for not being lived in for 5 years, took a lot of wind and water damage. This is one of 2 songs in the Beatles' discography where the Beatles didn't play any instruments. The other was Eleanor Rigby from 1966's Revolver. The string and harp was arranged by Mike Leander and conducted by George Martin. Sheila Bromberg played harp, the first time a woman performs on a Beatles record. This song is actually based off a true story. Paul said John and I wrote She's Leaving Home Together. It was my inspiration. We'd seen a story in the newspaper about a young girl who'd left and not been found. There was a lot of those at that time, and that was enough to give us a storyline." End quote. The newspaper was from a front page of the Daily Mirror, a British tabloid magazine about a 17-year-old girl named Melanie Coe. Although McCartney invented most of the song, Coe claims that most of it was actually accurate. The only differences were that it wasn't in the morning, but it was actually the afternoon while her parents were working, and
Meeting a man from the motor trade.
she actually met a man from a gambling casino, not the motor trade. Aside from that, though, Melanie said the amazing thing about the song was how much it got right about my life. It quoted the parents as saying, "We gave her everything money could buy," which was true in my case. She also said, "I heard the song when it came out and thought it was about someone else like me, but never dreamed it was actually about me." End quote. She looks back later, and though happy to be immortalized in a song, she definitely would do things differently if given the chance, something different than running away from home. Here's a strange song, but it has some neat history. Early '67, after filming the promotional film for Strawberry Fields Forever, John purchases an 1843 circus poster for, and I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong here, Pablo Fonque? I'll go with it. Lennon adapted most of the lyrics from that poster. The song's title came from the standard 19th century phrase used in advertising testimonial performances in Britain, being "for the benefit of." Though credited to Lennon and McCartney, Lennon claims that he written the entire song himself. Paul disagrees and said in a 2013 interview with Rolling Stone, "I read occasionally people say, 'Oh, John wrote that one.' I say, 'Wait a minute. What was the afternoon I spent with him looking at that poster?' He happened to have a poster in his living room at home. I was at his house, and we just got this idea, because the poster said, 'being for the benefit of Mr. Kite.' And then we put in, 'there will be a show tonight,' and then was like, of course, then it had Henry the Horse dances the waltz, whatever. The Hendersons, Pablo Fonque's, Somersets. We said, what was Somersets? Must have been some old-fashioned way of saying somersaults. The song just wrote itself. So yeah, I was happy to kind of reclaim it as partially mine. Mr. Kite is believed to be William Kite, who worked for Pablo from 1843 to 1845. Twice in the song, you can hear some pretty crazy circus music. The second one is longer and the more memorable one. Lennon wanted the track to have a carnival atmosphere and told George Martin that he wanted to smell the sawdust on the floor. In a 1968 interview, Martin recalled that he achieved this by playing the Hammond organ himself and speeding it up. In addition to the Hammond organ, a 19th century steam organ was found to enhance the atmosphere. They experimented with it a bit, and Martin had instructed Jeff Emmerich to chop up the tape pieces and then throw them up in the air and reassemble them, and so then you have some pieces that are going backward and forward in any random order, and it's a pretty crazy effect. Although initially John said it was just a throwaway track, that he wasn't proud of that, and I was just going through the motions. We needed a new song for Sgt. Pepper at that moment. He did come around in a 1980 Playboy interview. He described it as pure like a painting, a pure watercolor. Interesting. Pretty much right away you'll realize this is not a normal Beatles song. This album has a lot of songs that break the mold for a traditional Beatles song, but none more so than this one. This track pretty much features solely Indian instruments, including the tambla, dilruba, tambura, swarmandal. I'm probably pronouncing these names wrong, I'm sorry. Although we do have some classical instruments like 8 violins and 3 cellos. This is the only track on the album not written by the Lennon-McCartney team, and is written and sung by George. And George is the only Beatle who plays on the song. The rest of the musicians are Neil Aspinall and a group of uncredited musicians from the Asian music circle. George began writing in early '67 while at the house of musician and artist Klaus Voormann in North London suburb of Hampstead. Harrison's immediate inspiration for the song came from a conversation that they had over dinner regarding the metaphysical space that prevents individuals from recognizing the natural forces uniting the world. After that, he worked out the song's melody on harmonium and came up with that opening line, "We were talking about the space between us all." According to ethnomusicologist David Reck, aside from the reference to Maya, the lyrics convey Indian philosophical concepts such as Advait, which is the one essential reality, Satya, which is the perception of truth, And the line,
With our love, we could save the world.
which refers to universal love. At times, George distances himself from those who live in ignorance of those apparent truths by saying,
Are you one of them?
which is kinda accusatory, but this was the emerging ideology of the counterculture in the 1960s. The song ends with a burst of laughter, which some listeners have interpreted as a mockery of the song, but Harrison explains, it's a release after 5 minutes of sad music. You were supposed to hear the audience anyway as they listened to Sgt. Pepper's show. That was the style of the album. End quote. This is often seen as the album's jokey track, When I'm 64. The song starts off with a trio of clarinets, 2 B clarinets and a bass clarinet by Robert Burns, Henry Mackenzie, and Frank Ridey, arranged and conducted by Martin and McCartney. Although the theme of the song is aging and growing old, the song actually predates the album, being one of the first songs that Paul ever wrote, and wrote it when he was only 16. He was even in the Beatles set list in their early days as a song to perform when their amplifiers broke down or electricity went off. Lennon said, Paul wrote it in the Cavern days. We just stuck a few more words on it, like grandchildren on your knee and Vera, Chuck, and Dave, end quote. Paul said that when he wrote this song, he wasn't thinking about rock and roll at all, he was thinking about Sinatra, as he said in the documentary The Making of Sgt. Pepper in 1992, on the 25th anniversary of the album. 64 ended up being the first track used for the album, and started working on it as early as December of 66, and finished roughly the same time as Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane. George Martin later regretted not putting 64 as a B-side, referring to the Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields single that he had made. He said, the idea of a double A-side came from me and Brian, Epstein, really. He came to me and said, I must have a really great single, what have you got? I said, well, I've got 3 tracks, and 2 of them are the best tracks they've ever made. We can put them together and make a smashing single. We did, and it was a smashing single, but it was also a dreadful mistake. We could have sold far more and got higher in the charts if we had issued one of those with, say, When I'm 64 on the back. End quote from George Martin from the anthology. Last little fun fact about the song was Paul's father just coincidentally turned 64 this year in 1967. Lovely Rita. This fun song was supposedly written after Paul fell for a meter maid, which is a slang for a female traffic warden, while she was taking his plate number. His car was parked on a meter, which the time had expired. Paul said, I was bopping about the piano in Liverpool when someone told me that in America they call parking meter women meter maids. I thought that was great, and it got to Rita meter maid, and then Lovely Rita meter maid. And I was thinking vaguely that it should be a hate song. You took my car away, and I'm so blue today, and you wouldn't be liking her. But then I thought it would be better to love her. And if she was very freaky too, like a military man with a bag on her shoulder.
And the bag across her shoulder made her look a little like a military man.
To interrupt Paul's quote, that sound that you're hearing there is Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison playing Coleman paper, which gives it a kazoo-like sound. And back to Paul's quote, he continues saying, a foot stomper, but nice. The song was imagining if somebody was there taking down my number and I suddenly fell for her. And the kind of person I'd be to fall for a meter maid would be a shy office clerk, and I'd say, may I inquire discreetly when you are free to take some tea with me? Tea, not pot. It's like saying, come and cut the grass, and then realizing that could be pot. Or the old teapot could be something about pot. But I don't mind pot, and I leave the words in. They're not consciously introduced just to say pot and be clever. End quote from Paul from The Beatles in their own words. Although I find the song fun to listen to, John didn't care much for it. He called it a throwaway piece of garbage, and McCartney viewed it as Lennon's reaction to the frustrations of domestic life. Lennon said, Good Morning Is Mine is a throwaway, a piece of garbage. I always thought the Good Morning was from a Kellogg cereal commercial.
Good morning, good morning. the best to you each morning. Sunshine breakfast, Kellogg's cornflakes, crisp and full of sun.
I always had the TV on very low in the background when I was writing, and it came over, and then I wrote the song. End quote from All We Are Saying by David Sheff. At the end of the song, we hear a series of animal sounds. Lennon asked Emmerich to arrange the animal noises heard at the beginning and end of the song so that each animal heard was one capable of devouring or frightening the animal preceding it. The animal noises were inspired by the coda of Caroline No that ended the Beach Boys album Pet Sounds, which was one of the major inspirations for this album. The song begins with a rooster crowing, of course, and then at this point in the song we hear birds, followed by a cat, then a dog, cow, horse, sheep, elephant, and then a group of bloodhounds accompanying fox hunters with horns blasting. Emmerich said, "So those are not just random effects. There was actually a lot of thought put into all that." End quote. The song ends with a chicken clucking, which overlaps with the guitar being tuned in the next song, making a seamless transition between this song and the reprise of the title track. The track opens with McCartney's count-in retained in the manner of "I Saw Her Standing There" from Please Please Me. But between 2 and 3, we had Lennon interject "I." The song was written after Neil Aspinall suggested it. Since Sgt. Pepper opened the album, the fictional band should make an appearance toward the end. The reprise omits the brass section from the title track and features a faster tempo. This song ends up being one of the shortest songs in the Beatles' catalog. The shortest is, of course, Her Majesty at only 23 seconds on 1969's Abbey Road. It was recorded on April 1st, 1967, 2 months after the version that opened the album, and that's no joke. The song transitions into the final track on the album, which this crossfade uses 3 tape machines. I see this song acting as kind of the encore for Sgt. Pepper's band. The song starts off with acoustic guitar and piano, and then the story had been taken from the Daily Mail about a true life story. According to Lennon, the inspiration for the first 2 verses were about the death of Tara Browne, the 21-year-old heir to the Guinness fortune, who had an unfortunate car accident December 18th, 1966. Browne was a friend of Lennon and McCartney, and had earlier in the year gave McCartney his first LSD experience. They of course put their own spin on the story. Tara didn't blow his mind out, but it was in my mind when I was writing the verse. The details of the accident in the song, not noticing the traffic lights, and a crowd forming at the scene were similarly part of the fiction, McCartney said. He continues saying, "The verse about the politician blowing his mind out in a car we wrote together. It has been attributed to Tara Browne, the Guinness heir, which I don't believe is the case. Certainly as we were writing it, I was not attributing to Tara in my head. In John's head, it might have been. In my head, I was imagining a politician bombed out on drugs who had stopped at some traffic light and didn't notice the lights had changed. The blew his mind was purely a drug reference, nothing to do with a car crash." End quote. This is likely a reference to the film that Lennon starred in during their 3-month break in the fall of 1966 called How I Won the War. What's going on? Song is all over the place. Whoa! Oh, that was weird. And now we're in a different song? Or the same song? The middle 8 section was a short piano piece by McCartney about getting out of bed and setting off for school. Originally, the alarm sound you heard was going to be removed once they filled in a middle section, but it fit very well with Paul singing "Woke Up, Fell Out of Bed." Paul describes our character's morning. "It was just me remembering what it was like to run up the road to catch a bus, having a smoke, and going into class. It was a reflection of my school days. I would have a Woodbine, a cheap unfiltered British cigarette, and somebody would speak, and I would go into a dream." End quote. The song goes back to John. who sings a verse about 4,000 holes, which Lennon said the song's final verse was inspired by a far and near news brief in the same January 17th that had inspired the first two verses.
4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire.
Under the headline, "The Holes in the Roads," the brief stated there are 4,000 holes in the road in Blackburn, Lancashire, or 1/26th of a hole per person, according to council survey. If Blackburn is typical, there are 2 million holes in Britain's roads and 300,000 in London. We have that crazy orchestra coming, but let's raise the needle on the record for a second. This line has a story. McCartney said about the line, "I'd love to turn you on," which concludes both verse sections. This was the first time of a Tim Leary's turn on, tune in, drop out, and he wrote, "I'd love to turn you on." John and I gave each other a knowing look. It's a drug song, you know that, don't you? End quote. Since there is a big drug reference here, the BBC announced it would not broadcast the song due to this line. Other lyrics allegedly referring to drugs included, "Found my way upstairs and had a smoke, somebody spoke and I went into a dream." Okay, let's start that montage. This orchestra segment includes strings, brass, woodwinds, and percussion arranged by Martin, Lennon, and McCartney and conducted by Martin and McCartney. Originally, Paul wanted a 90-piece orchestra, but was only able to get a 40-piece orchestra. They essentially recorded multiple times, filling a separate 4-track tape machine, then overdubbed into one massive piece. George Martin notes Lennon's request for a tremendous build from nothing up to something absolutely like the end of the world. End quote, and let's slam that E chord. This E chord on piano concludes the track and album and goes on for about 45 seconds. And the recording level was so high that it even recorded studio chatter, chair squeaking, and even the air conditioner running. Anyway, the song then fades out and the song ends, for the most part. If you have furry friends in the room with you, you might want them to leave just for the next minute or so. Pause it right here. First released on LP in the UK and years later on CD, is a high-frequency 15 kHz tone and some randomly spliced Beatles studio chatter. The frequency is basically a dog whistle where it can only be picked up by a dog's ear. They joked about it, picturing barking dogs should they be present when the album would finish. See, I was just looking out for your dogs. I didn't want them howling and everything. By the way, if you are listening to this on vinyl and your turntable's needle doesn't lift up when the record is done, this will play continuously for eternity. Wow, what an album, am I right? I still can't believe it's been 50 years! This is one of those must-have albums for anyone's record collection or music collection. Since its release, it has reached 11 times platinum for selling over 11 million copies by the RIAA, and that's just in the US alone. And then add in the UK, where it reached 17 times platinum by the BPI for selling another 5,100,000 copies, and that's still not taking into account the rest of the world. This has been Awesome Andrew telling you that Sgt. Pepper is an awesome album, and I will see you guys next time. For more information on Sgt. Pepper, check out the video I made on the history of the album, the making of the album, and the iconic album cover. There will also be an Awesome Albums Extras video coming soon with even more facts about the album. There was so much information out there that it took not one video, not 2 videos, but at least 3 videos to make. But until then, I will catch you guys in another episode, and I'll see you then.